She dismissed him in front of 43 employees, 2 board members, and a floor-to-ceiling window that overlooked the entire Vancouver harbor. Constance Aldridge had her head of security walk, a man out of her company's annual investor preview, like he was someone who'd wandered in off the street. She didn't ask his name. She didn't need to. He was wearing a flannel shirt, carrying a Tim Hortons cup, and he smiled when they touched his arm, which should have been the first sign she was making the worst mistake of her career. It wasn't. 2 hours and 11 minutes later, her phone rang. The $40 million partnership offer she'd been building toward for 6 months was gone, and the man they'd walked out the side entrance, he was the one who'd been holding it. If you're watching this from your city, drop it in the comments. Stay with me until the end. This one gets harder before it gets better. The morning had started the way bad ones always did, quietly, dressed up to look like something ordinary. Constance Aldridge woke at 5:50 to an alarm she didn't need because she hadn't slept past 4. She lay on her back in her condo on the 14th floor of a Yaletown building, listening to the rain come in off the water the way it always did in November, soft and continuous and indifferent to whatever anyone had planned for the day. She'd been running Aldridge Renewables for 3 years. She'd taken the CEO seat at 32 after her mother's diagnosis had made a quiet handover impossible and a rushed one inevitable. The board at the time had been polite about it, politely skeptical, the kind of skeptical that wore good suits and nodded at everything you said and then voted against you in committee. She'd outlasted most of them. But outlasting wasn't the same as winning, not permanently, and today was supposed to be different. She made coffee in the kitchen the manual way because the machine her operations director had ordered 3 months ago was still in the box. She stood at the window while it brewed and watched the harbor, the cargo ships sitting low and dark in the gray water, the North Shore mountains disappearing into cloud. $40 million. She'd said the number so many times in the past 8 weeks that it had stopped feeling like money and started feeling like a condition, like something her company needed the way a person needed a particular medication to stop something slow and quiet from becoming something fast and irreversible. Her CFO, a careful, precise man named Gerald Nakamura, had laid it out plainly in September. Without a significant capital injection before the end of Q1, Aldridge Renewables would spend the following year contracting, slowly, in ways that looked managed from the outside and felt catastrophic from the inside. They could survive it, probably. But Gerald used the word probably the way a doctor used the word concerning, with everything it implied underneath. The Whitmore Capital Partnership was supposed to end the probably. Nolan Whitmore wasn't a name that appeared in Vancouver Sun profiles or LinkedIn thought leadership posts. He didn't do podcasts or keynote addresses at clean energy conferences. What he had was a track record that people in rooms Constance was only recently being invited into mentioned with a particular kind of careful respect, the kind reserved for people who had more money than they had any interest in being known for. 15 years building a fund that consistently outperformed in sectors everyone else had written off too soon. He'd backed 3 companies in the past 5 years that had each gone on to become exactly what their founders said they would be. He was 41. He had a daughter. The daughter's name, Constance, had learned from a single profile piece in a BC Business article he'd apparently only agreed to because the publication was running a series on sustainable investment and a portion of ad revenue was going to a coastal conservation trust. She had spent 5 weeks preparing for this preview. Her team had rebuilt the pitch deck twice. She'd rewritten the executive summary herself. She'd had Gerald run the numbers 4 separate ways until the story they told was true and tight and impossible to misread. Her chair, a measured woman named Patricia Engel, had been quietly enthusiastic. This is the right moment, Patricia had told her over the phone the week before. Whitmore doesn't come to things like this unless he's already interested. Don't oversell. Let the work speak. Constance had believed her. She'd believed all of it. The coffee was ready. She poured it into a mug her assistant had given her as a joke. It said "World's Most Caffeinated Executive," and she held it with both hands and thought about the day ahead. By the time she was in the car, she'd answered 3 emails and missed a call from her mother, which she'd return later when she had the right kind of quiet for it. Aldridge Renewables occupied 2 floors of a glass building near Olympic Village, the kind of building that tried to look like what it was housing. Forward-thinking, clean-lined, committed to something beyond the immediate quarter. The lobby had a living wall her mother had insisted on when they'd first leased the space. It had seemed like an indulgence at the time. Now Constance couldn't imagine the building without it. She arrived at 7:40 and went straight to her office on the upper floor. Daphne, her executive assistant, was already at her desk, holding an iPad with the focused expression of someone managing 17 things simultaneously and making it look like 4. "Good morning," Daphne said. "You've got 20 minutes before the preview setup starts." The AV team had a projector issue, but it's resolved. Patricia's running 10 minutes behind because of the bridge traffic, and catering delivered the wrong coffee service. They sent the pre-packaged stuff instead of the local roast you requested. Constance set her bag down. "Can we fix it?" "Already called." "They're sending someone." "Good." She looked at her desk. "Anything from Whitmore Capital." "Confirmation of attendance." 2 people. His associate, someone named Brennan Cho, and Whitmore himself. Constance nodded. She spent the next 20 minutes going through the presentation one more time. Not from nerves, exactly. More the way you checked your equipment before something you'd trained hard for. Not because you expected to find something wrong, but because the checking was part of the preparation. Part of the thing that allowed you to walk in steady. Her mother used to say that the calm before something hard wasn't calm at all. It was concentration that had found its form. Constance wasn't sure she agreed, but she kept the thought anyway. At 8:15, she walked into the preview room. It was the best space in the building. A converted open floor with the harbor visible through a full-width window, rows of seating arranged in a gentle arc, their project installations and demonstration models set up along the north wall. The room had been designed to do what all good rooms do, make the work look like what it actually was. Constance checked the presentation on the main screen, adjusted 2 of the display panels, and drank half a glass of water while the room filled with staff and stakeholders she'd worked alongside for 3 years. Patricia arrived at 8:52, carrying her portfolio case and wearing the expression of someone who had been through enough preview mornings to be calm without being casual. She squeezed Constance's arm once, said, "You're ready," and took her seat. The Whitmore Capital representatives were expected at 9. At 8:57, the back doors opened. Constance was in conversation with Gerald when it happened. She heard the shift before she saw it, that particular recalibration a room makes when someone enters who wasn't expected in that precise moment, that slight redirection of attention. She turned to look. A man was standing near the back of the room. He was maybe 40-42, average height, nothing about his posture that announced anything. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray flannel shirt, no jacket, no lanyard, no conference badge. He was holding a large Tim Hortons cup, the plain kind, no sleeve, and he was looking at the harbor through the window with the unhurried expression of someone who had nowhere else to be and found that entirely acceptable. "Excuse me." Her events coordinator, a 25-year-old named Marcus, who took his job with the total commitment of someone recently given real responsibility, appeared at the man's side. "Can I help you?" The man turned. He had an easy face, not blank, just uncrowded. "I'm all right, thanks," he said. His voice was even, unhurried. "This is a private preview," Marcus said. "Do you have a registration confirmation?" Something moved in the man's expression, a small private notation. "I don't have a confirmation email," he said. "I thought my associate sent one ahead. I'm going to need to ask you to wait in the lobby until we can verify." "Of course," he said. He didn't move yet. He was still looking at the harbor. Constance had started toward them. Not because she'd registered anything particular, more that the room was filling, and she needed things moving on schedule. She looked at the man and felt something she couldn't immediately identify, a familiarity she couldn't locate. The feeling of a word you know but can't place. "I'm sorry," she said. "Are you here with Whitmore Capital?" The man looked at her. His expression didn't change. "I'm here for the 9 o'clock." She glanced toward the door. Brennan Cho had confirmed. Whitmore himself was listed as attending separately. She looked back at the man in the flannel shirt with the Tim Hortons cup. She looked at him for a second, too short. She was already half-turned toward Gerald, who was flagging her about something with the projector. She should have stopped. She would think about this at 2 in the morning, 4 days from now, staring at the ceiling, that the moment had been right there, available. That one question would have changed everything. "Marcus," she said, "can you get his information and have him wait in the lobby? We'll sort it out before we start." She turned back toward the front of the room. She didn't hear the exact exchange. She heard the door open. She heard it close. She heard Brennan Cho arrive 40 seconds later, sharp suit, leather folder, the expression of someone who had been watching something go wrong from the moment they walked into a building. Brennan looked at the seat beside him. He set down his folder. He said nothing. Constance presented at 9 on the dot. She was good at this. She'd been doing it long enough that the surface of it could run without her full attention, which meant her full attention could go to reading the room. She walked through the company's 3-year trajectory. She made the case for the expansion into Alberta. She walked through the partnership structure, The projected returns, the values alignment that made Whitmore Capital specifically the right fit, and not just any capital. Nolan Whitmore's empty chair sat in the second row and did not move. No one mentioned it. At 10:47, Daphne appeared at the back of the room and caught Constance's eye with the particular look that meant, "Stop what you're doing." Constance closed the presentation with 2 minutes of prepared remarks she'd rehearsed enough to say without her brain and called a brief intermission. She was in the corridor before the door finished closing. Daphne was 2 steps away, holding her phone like it was something that might go off. "You need to read this." The email was from Nolan Whitmore's office. It was short. It said that Whitmore Capital was withdrawing its interest in a partnership with Aldridge Renewables, effective immediately. It said the decision was final. It said any further inquiries should be directed to their legal team. The last line said they wished Aldridge Renewables continued success. Constance read it twice. She was aware of her breathing, the controlled, deliberate kind you used when you didn't want your body to tell anyone what was happening inside it. "When did this come in?" 10:31, Daphne said. 92 minutes since the preview had started. 92 minutes since the man in the flannel shirt had been walked out the side entrance with his coffee cup. "Daphne? Yeah, what does Nolan Whitmore look like?" Daphne looked at her. A long second passed. Then she took her phone back, pulled something up, and handed it over. The photo was professional but plain. A man in his early 40s, direct eyes, the expression of someone who had learned to be photographed without giving anything away. Constance looked at the photograph. The photograph looked back. She handed the phone to Daphne. She stood in the corridor and said nothing for a moment. "I need 5 minutes," she said. She went to the bathroom at the end of the hall. She ran cold water over the inside of her wrists the way she used to do before competitions when she was 18 and swimming at a provincial level, and her body would start to separate from her before a race. The cold brought you back. That was what her coach had told her. It doesn't fix anything. It just brings you back to where you are. She looked at herself in the mirror. 5 weeks of preparation, a pitch deck rebuilt twice, the right coffee ordered from the right roaster, and she'd had a man walked out of her own preview room without asking his name. She dried her hands. She went back and told the room the preview was concluded, that follow-up materials would come from her office, and thanked everyone for their time. She said it evenly. She didn't explain. After the room cleared, she sat at the front for 7 minutes. Patricia came back in. She sat across from Constance with the careful composure of someone managing her own reaction. "What happened?" she asked. "We lost the partnership." Patricia went still. "How? I need to think," Constance said. She thought all afternoon. She rebuilt the timeline the way she used to rebuild bad races, moment by moment, decision by decision, looking for the point where the wrong choice had compounded. The man had arrived at 8:57. Flannel shirt, Tim Hortons cup. She'd delegated, she'd turned away. She'd been looking at Gerald and the projector and the clock, and she had not looked at the person standing near the window who had looked at the harbor like someone who had seen a lot of things and was in no particular hurry to impress anyone with that. There was a version of this morning where she'd stopped, where she'd said, "Hold on," or "What's your name?" or simply stayed in the conversation long enough to hear the answer. She hadn't. And now she was sitting in an empty room with a dead deal and a company still running on runway that was shortening by the quarter. She started researching the next morning. Her mother had always said information was the thing you owed a decision before you made it. Constance pulled everything publicly available on Nolan Whitmore. She did it herself, not because she didn't trust her team, but because she didn't want this to become a story inside the building yet. What she found was both more and less than she expected. Nolan Whitmore had started his fund at 30 with a handful of investors who'd believed in him before the record existed to justify it. He'd built it over 15 years into something that wasn't the largest or the flashiest, but was, in terms of actual decisions and actual outcomes, exceptional. He was 41. He had a daughter named Lily, mentioned only in that one BC business profile, which he'd agreed to on the condition that the focus remain on the investment philosophy rather than him personally. The photo had taken 3 months of requests. Near the end of the profile, there was a quote she read twice. "I've never been interested in looking like I'm paying attention. I'm interested in actually paying attention. Most rooms can't tell the difference. That's useful information." She set the article down. She stood at her office window and looked at the harbor, the same view the man in the flannel shirt had been looking at when she'd walked past him, and she thought about what he had tested and what the test had cost her. She called Brennan Cho at 2 in the afternoon. He answered on the 3rd ring. "Miss Aldridge, thank you for taking my call. I almost didn't. A beat. What happened yesterday was as embarrassing for your company. Not for Mr. Whitmore. I know that. I failed to identify him, and I let my team manage the situation instead of managing it myself. A pause. Longer. He does this every time, Brennan said. First meeting, no advance introduction, no announcement. He wants to see how a room responds to someone who doesn't signal wealth or status. Most rooms fail. Yours failed in a particular way. What way? He was watching you, Brennan said. Not your coordinator. You. He wanted to see what you would do when your coordinator made a call, and you were already somewhere else. Constance didn't respond immediately. Outside her window, a float plane lifted off the water and banked south. Is there anything I can do? She asked. Probably not. He doesn't reopen things as a rule. A pause. He did ask me one thing this morning. She waited. He asked whether you made the call yourself or had your assistant do it. Constance looked at her phone screen, her own name on the outgoing call display. I called, she said. I know. I told him that. 3 days later, Gerald came to her office at 3:15 and closed the door, something he only did when the news was the kind that shouldn't travel through glass. I've been going through the Meridian Growth Group numbers, he said. Meridian Growth Group was the firm that had reached out the morning after Whitmore Capital withdrew, expressing interest in a similar partnership structure. Constance had noticed the timing. She told herself it was coincidence. She was beginning to revise that. Gerald put a single page on her desk. His handwriting, small and exact. Meridian's primary capital source, through 2 intermediary structures, traces back to a holding company called Seaview Advisory Partners. He paused. Seaview Advisory was incorporated 14 months ago. Its registered agent is a law firm that also represents, among other clients, our chair. Constance looked at the page. Patricia? Her voice was flat. I spent 10 hours on this, Gerald said. I'm certain. She sat very still. The harbor outside her window was doing what it always did, moving, gray, continuous. Patricia had pushed her toward Whitmore Capital. Patricia had been the one to say this is the right moment. Patricia had been warm and measured and had squeezed her arm that morning and told her she was ready. And when the partnership had collapsed, Patricia had sat across from her in the empty room with carefully managed composure and said what happened. She already knew what had happened. She'd arranged it. Don't tell anyone, Constance said. Already haven't. I need to think. She thought for 14 hours. At 6 the next morning, she was at the small cafe 2 blocks from her building, a place called Anchor and Grind with scuffed wood floors and a barista named Yolanda who made her Americano without asking, because she'd been coming here long enough that the order was simply a fact. She was at the window table with her second coffee and a yellow legal pad when the door opened and a child walked in. She was maybe 9, dark coat, slightly too long for her. She was carrying a sketchbook against her chest like something she was responsible for. She looked around the cafe with the frank, assessing gaze of someone who had opinions about rooms. Then she went to a table near the back, opened the sketchbook, and started drawing without looking up. Constance watched her for a moment, then went back to her legal pad. 4 minutes later, the door opened again. She knew before she looked. She didn't know how she knew. Maybe the shift in the room, maybe pattern recognition. Her brain had been assembling a picture of a person from fragments for 4 days. Nolan Whitmore walked in carrying a large Tim Hortons cup, the same size, same plain cup as before, and crossed to the table where the child was sitting. He set it down, said something quiet that made the girl glance up, then immediately looked back down at her sketchbook. He sat across from her, opened a notebook. He didn't look at Constance. She looked at her legal pad for approximately 90 seconds. Then she got up. She walked to their table. She stood there until he looked up. 4 seconds. When he did, his expression was the same she'd seen at the preview, unhurried, attentive, neither warm nor unkind. The expression of someone who had been waiting to see what she would do next. I owe you an apology, she said. She hadn't planned the phrasing, not a professional one, a real one. What happened in that room was wrong, and it was wrong because I wasn't paying attention to the right things. Nolan looked at her. The girl hadn't looked up, but her pencil had slowed. You didn't have to make it easy for us to see you clearly. You did, and we still got it wrong. I'm sorry. Something moved in his face. Not surprise. Something more considered. Sit down, he said. She sat down. The girl looked up then, briefly. Dark, careful eyes. His eyes, and the same quality of attention in them, the kind that saw more than it announced. Then she looked back at her sketchbook. This is Lily, Nolan said. He said her name the way people said the names of things they were careful with. Hi, Lily, Constance said. Lily said nothing but angled the sketchbook slightly in her direction for a moment. On the page was the cafe, the counter, the tables, Yolanda at the bar, a man reading in the corner. It was genuinely good. The proportions were right. The light was suggested rather than stated, which was the harder thing to do. She draws wherever we go, Nolan said. It wasn't an apology or a performance, just a fact about the world he lived in. Constance looked at Lily's bent head. She thought of several things to say and said none of them, because sometimes silence was more honest than anything you could find to fill it with. She looked at Nolan. I know what my company needs and what partnership would make sense. But I'm not here to pitch you. She paused. I think there's something wrong inside my company, something bigger than a bad preview. And before I do anything about it, I need to be more certain than I am right now. He watched her. Why are you telling me? Because you already walked away, she said. You have no reason to be involved. Which means if you tell me what you know, you're telling me because it's the right thing. Not for any other reason. Silence. The cafe moved around them, Yolanda calling out an order, a chair scraping, the particular sound of rain starting again on the windows. Lily's pencil moved across the page. Patricia Engel, Nolan said. The name settled between them like something that had been waiting. She contacted us 3 weeks before your preview, he said. Through an intermediary. She communicated that the partnership, if structured through her preferred terms, would include an advisory arrangement for a consulting group she was connected to. She said this reflected your company's standard approach to capital partnerships. He paused. I came to your preview to see whether that was true. Constance was very still, and then I was asked to wait in the lobby, he said. Not with satisfaction, just factually. I understand, she said. I don't think you understand completely. He leaned forward slightly, the first time his posture had changed. What Engel communicated, if accurate, means the partnership was never going to close on the terms you presented. She was going to engineer a restructure at the last moment that served her connected interests. Your $40 million was going to move through her framework before it touched your company. Constance looked at the table, then at him. Can you prove it? I can tell you what I know, he said. What you do with it is your business. That has to be your business, not mine. She understood the line he was drawing. She understood it was the right line. Thank you, she said. He nodded once. Lily looked up. She turned the sketchbook toward Constance. On the page, the cafe. And at the window table, now added, small and careful, 2 figures sitting across from each other, coffee cups between them. Is that us? Constance asked. Lily considered the drawing with the critical eye she used on everything. You both have the same look, she said. Like you're trying to figure something out. Nolan made a sound that was almost a laugh. He redirected it. He didn't entirely succeed. Constance looked at the 2 small figures on the page and felt something shift in the morning. Not the crisis, that was still there, solid and real, something underneath it. A current running in a different direction than the day had started in. She stood. She picked up her legal pad. I have a lot of work to do, she said. I know, he said. She walked out into the November rain and stood on the sidewalk for a moment before she started moving. What she had, Gerald's documentation of the Meridian Seaview Patricia connection, Nolan's account of the intermediary approach, the timeline, Patricia pushing toward Whitmore Capital, the deal collapsing, Meridian appearing the very next morning as though it had been sitting in an anteroom. What she needed, a paper link between Patricia and Meridian that existed beyond shell companies, something that would hold through a board vote and survive a lawyer, what she didn't have time to be, wrong. Gerald came to her office that afternoon with a second page. Patricia had a personal financial advisory relationship with a firm called Northgate Capital Services, disclosed in her original conflict of interest paperwork when she joined the board 4 years ago because it hadn't been relevant then. Northgate was listed as a co-manager for the Meridian Growth Group Fund. Not the same account, but the same compliance officer. It's a thread, Gerald said. Pull it, she said. She called her external legal counsel that evening, a woman named Sandra Pelletier, who had practiced corporate law in Vancouver for 22 years and had the composure of someone who'd seen every variety of institutional bad behavior and hadn't been surprised by any of it. Constance laid out what she had. Sandra listened without interrupting. How solid is the financial documentation? Sandra asked when she finished. My CFO built it. What about the account from the outside investor? The one describing the intermediary approach. Firsthand. Nothing in writing yet. Written would be better. Can you get it? Constance thought about Nolan's line. What you do with it is your business. I don't know, she said honestly. Here's what I need, Sandra said. Don't confront her. Don't let her know you're looking. Get me everything you have by Friday morning. A pause. If what you're describing is accurate, this is a breach of fiduciary duty at minimum, possibly more, depending on what the Meridian connection looks like on paper. Constance exhaled. Okay, one more thing. Who knows? My CFO, me, and the outside investor, though not the details of what I've found, keep it exactly that way. The next 2 days were the work. Gerald pulled 3 years of financial records on every decision Patricia had touched, Advisory contracts, vendor approvals, deals that had stalled. What emerged was a pattern that was worse than Constance had wanted it to be and more coherent than she'd hoped. 2 vendor contracts at above market rates tracing back to connected parties. A strategic acquisition from 18 months ago, one that would have been excellent for the company, that had been quietly killed in committee on Patricia's recommendation. The target company had been picked up 6 months later by a firm with a co-investment arrangement linked to Seaview Advisory. Patricia hadn't just been building something around the Whitmore deal, she'd been doing this for years. Constance sat at her kitchen table at midnight with Gerald's compiled pages and a highlighter and felt something that wasn't exactly anger. Anger was too reactive. What she felt was colder and more durable, the feeling of a decision solidifying. She texted Nolan the next morning. She kept it short. She said she needed 15 minutes if he was willing, that she wasn't asking about the deal, and that she would explain when they spoke. His reply came in 4 words, same cafe. Tomorrow. 8. Sandra reviewed the compiled documents by video call Friday morning. This is substantial, she said, not airtight, but substantial enough to bring to the board. She paused. The outside investor account, even a written summary of what he observed, not a formal declaration, would change the weight of what you're presenting. After the call, Constance sat at her desk for 10 minutes. Then she texted Nolan. The intermediary who contacted you, she wrote. Is there anything you can give me in writing? Not testimony, just what you observed documented. She put the phone down. She told herself not to watch it. His reply came in 6 minutes. Who's your lawyer? Sandra Pelletier, she wrote. A pause. I know Sandra. She's good. Then, I'll have Brennan send her a written account by end of day. The intermediary's name is Carolyn Marsh. She represents herself as a deal facilitator. I can document the date, the approach, the specific terms communicated, terms that never appeared in anything you authorized. Constance exhaled. One condition, he added. She waited. You present this to the board yourself. Not Sandra, not Gerald. You walk in and you lay it down. She stared at the message. She almost typed, of course, and then didn't, because it wasn't of course. He knew it and she knew it. I know it has to be me, she typed. His reply was immediate. Good. The emergency board meeting was called for Monday morning. Constance submitted the formal request Sunday evening, citing the breach of duty provision in the company's governance bylaws, listing Gerald and Sandra as witnesses. All 5 remaining board members confirmed by 9 p.m. Patricia confirmed at 11:14, late, which told Constance she'd spent 2 hours deciding whether to appear. She appeared, of course she did. Absence would have been its own statement. Monday morning, Constance took the elevator to the boardroom alone. She'd been in this room hundreds of times. She knew where the light fell in November, which seats faced the glare from the harbor, where Patricia always sat. She set her documents at the head of the table, her chair. Not Patricia's end. She'd made that decision the night before. She claimed the head before the room filled. Sandra sat to her left, Gerald across from her. The room filled over the next 8 minutes. The other 4 board members, the company's general counsel, a representative from the governance committee. Patricia arrived at 10:03. She was composed in the practiced way of someone who had been composing themselves since the night before. She made brief contact with everyone in the room, the warmth moving ahead of her like something she'd rehearsed so long it felt natural. She looked at Constance at the head of the table. Something crossed her face, fast and controlled. Then the warmth came back. Constance, she said, taking her seat. Unusual call for a Monday. Thank you for coming, Constance said. She began. She did it the way Sandra had outlined, pattern before the name. She walked the board through the financial timeline, the vendor contracts, the rate structures, the acquisition that had died in committee and been picked up by a connected firm 6 months later. She presented it without adjectives. She let the numbers speak. She watched the room follow, the governance rep's expression tightening, one of the independent directors leaning forward, the general counsel going very still. She did not look at Patricia. Not yet. She presented the Meridian Seaview Patricia connection. She walked through the intermediary chain, the compliance officer link, the timing of Meridian's outreach. The morning after Whitmore Capital withdrew, as though it had been scheduled, she heard Patricia shift in her chair. I'd like to address some context here, Patricia said. Her voice was measured and warm, the voice she used for things she needed to manage. Under the board's governance provision on active integrity disclosures, Constance said, without raising her voice, the presenting officer may not be interrupted until the disclosure is complete. I'll ask you to hold your response until I've finished. Thank you, Patricia. The room went very quiet. She looked at Patricia when she said it. She held the eye contact for 3 full seconds. Then she looked back at her documents and continued. She presented Brennan's written account last. She introduced it as a documented statement from an external investment principal, obtained voluntarily, describing an intermediary approach made to Whitmore Capital 3 weeks prior to the company's investor preview. She read 3 excerpts, naming Carolyn Marsh, identifying the specific terms communicated, confirming the date and the nature of the arrangement. Terms that had never appeared in any version of the partnership structure Constance had prepared or authorized. She set the document down. She looked up at the room. The governance rep was looking at Patricia. Both independent directors were looking at Patricia. The general counsel had stopped writing. Patricia looked at Constance. This was the moment Sandra had described. The particular look, the one that was designed to make you feel like the problem in the room. She'd used it on Constance before, in smaller ways, in meetings where Constance had pushed against something and Patricia had managed her back to compliance with the warmth and the eye contact and the steady implication that Constance was newer to this than she was. Constance looked back. She did not look away. "These are serious claims," Patricia said. Her voice had lost some of its smoothness, just at the edges, and I want to be clear I take them seriously. But what's being presented is a set of circumstantial connections and an unsigned account from an unnamed external source, brought forward by a CEO under considerable pressure following a failed partnership opportunity. She looked around the table. "I think what this company needs is perspective, Graham," Constance said. Turning to the general counsel, "Would you read the fiduciary duty provision from the governance charter, section 8? He read it. 11 words, not much wiggle room. "A documented pattern of conduct across 18 months, Constance said, with evidence of direct financial benefit to connected outside parties, meets the threshold for an independent review under that provision." She looked at the full table. "I'm not asking this board to reach a conclusion today. I'm asking you to authorize an independent audit of every advisory contract, vendor arrangement, and deal recommendation involving the chair over the past 3 years. That's the appropriate step." She paused. "I'm also moving that Patricia Engel recuse herself from all board activities pending the outcome of that audit. Silence, the kind that has weight." Patricia put both hands flat on the table. "I have given 4 years to this company," she said. 4 years, and I think everyone in this room knows. I think we've heard the disclosure." The voice came from the far end of the table. Howard Breslin, 67, the longest-serving independent director, who had been on the board since before Constance's mother, had handed her the keys and who rarely spoke in meetings, but spoke in a way that meant the meeting was over when he did. He was looking at Patricia with an expression that held no warmth at all. "I think we should vote." Patricia looked at Howard. Howard looked back. Something in Patricia's face changed, not dramatically, not the way you'd script it. It was more like watching a structure develop a crack, still standing, still trying to look solid, but the weight sitting on it differently. "I'd like to speak to counsel before any vote," she said. "You're welcome to do that after," Howard said. "Sandra, is the motion properly constituted? It is, then let's vote." It took 4 minutes. 5 board members, 1 recusal. The general counsel stepped back from the vote on legal grounds, leaving 4 votes on the table beyond Patricia's own. The motion to authorize an independent audit passed 4-1. The motion for Patricia's recusal pending the audit passed 4-1. Patricia voted against both. She did it looking straight ahead, her jaw set, the warmth entirely gone. After the second vote, she stood. She straightened her jacket. She looked at Constance, and Constance looked back, and the room was quiet, and the harbor was gray behind the glass. "You're making a mistake," Patricia said. Quiet, the voice under the voice, harder than the one the room had always heard. "I don't think I am," Constance said. Patricia walked out. The door closed. Constance stood at the head of the table and felt the room reconfigure. Board members who had been rigid were leaning back. The governance rep was already on her phone. Gerald was writing quickly. Sandra was gathering her documents with the focused efficiency of someone who had more work to do and no time for the emotional aftermath of the thing that had just happened. Howard Breslin caught her eye from across the table. He didn't say anything. He gave her one slow nod, the kind that meant, "I saw what that cost." She nodded back. She stayed at the head of the table until the room had cleared, and then she sat down because her legs were doing something she didn't want to display, and she put both hands flat on the table and breathed. Outside, the harbor was the same harbor. The rain had stopped. The North Shore Mountains were visible again, just. The world had not rearranged itself around what had happened in this room. It didn't need to. Sandra sat back down across from her. "You held the room," she said. "I held the room," Constance said. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. That evening from her kitchen, she texted Nolan. Board voted. Audit authorized. She recused. She looked at it for a second and added, "I held the room. His reply came in 3 minutes. I know you did. She looked at that for a long time. She didn't know if he'd been told by someone, or if it was simply the confidence of a person who had assessed another person carefully and arrived at an expectation. She thought it was the second one. She thought he had looked at her across a cafe table and had already known. She put the phone face down and looked at the harbor through her kitchen window. The city lights on the water, the container ships sitting still and dark. She had a company to run. She picked up her notepad and went back to work. There was still a lot of it. The audit concluded in late January. The independent firm delivered the report in person, the kind of report that arrives with a human being attached because it's too heavy to send over email. The numbers were worse than Constance had prepared herself for, which meant they were worse than she'd allowed herself to imagine. Patricia had been redirecting company resources and deal flow for the benefit of connected outside parties for not 3 years but closer to 4. The acquisition killed in committee, the above-market vendor contracts, the Whitmore setup. These were not isolated decisions. They were a pattern. Careful, slow, using access and position and the trust the board had extended across 4 years. 4 years. Constance had taken the chair 3 years ago, which meant Patricia had started this before her, before the handover, before the illness had made the handover urgent. She hadn't taken advantage of the transition period. She'd already been doing this, and the transition had simply given her better cover. Constance sat with that number, 4 years, while Sandra walked them through the report section by section, and she kept her face neutral, because the room was not the right room for what she was feeling, and she had learned, across the last 3 months, exactly where to put the things that needed to be felt but not performed. The SEC referral was filed Friday morning. By Friday afternoon it was public the way these things always became public. Her phone ran hot for several hours. She made one statement, 8 sentences. She said what needed to be said. At 5 o'clock she went home. She made dinner at the table, sitting down. She called her mother. They talked for 40 minutes. Her brother's new job, a trip her mother was planning to Prince Edward Island in the spring. Her mother asked how work was going, and Constance said it was complicated but okay, and her mother said she didn't sound complicated. She sounded tired, and Constance said she was a little, and her mother said that her grandmother used to say tiredness after hard work was just the weight of the thing you'd been carrying, becoming something you could set down. Constance said she thought that was exactly right. She slept 9 hours. She woke up feeling like a person again rather than a series of contingency plans. The Saturday after the report dropped, Nolan texted, "Coffee. Same cafe. 9. She was there at 8:52, which was information about how much she'd been looking forward to it. Lily was with him. She came in clutching her sketchbook like cargo, looked around Anchor and Grind with her usual assessing expression, selected a table near the back, and began drawing before her coat was fully off. Nolan got coffees. He sat across from Constance. He looked at her the way he looked at things, fully, without announcement. "You look different," he said. "It's over," she said. "The first part." He understood the distinction. He always understood distinctions without needing them explained, which was one of the things she'd noticed early and kept noticing. "How do you feel?" he asked. The real version of the question. "Lighter than I expected," she said, "which might be delayed processing, or it might just be accurate." "Probably accurate," he said. They sat there until 10:30, talking about things that weren't the company, a book he'd been reading about the history of the Salish Sea, a film she'd seen over the holidays, something Lily had said at her school's art show that had made her teacher speechless in the best way. At some point, Lily came over. She stood at the edge of the table and looked at Constance with the direct assessment she'd had from the beginning. "Are you going to keep coming to things with us?" she asked. Constance glanced at Nolan, who was looking at his coffee with the expression she'd learned to read as his way of giving her room. "I'd like to," Constance said, "if that's okay with you." Lily considered this with genuine seriousness. "You're less careful now than the first time," she said. "Careful how? Like you were waiting for something to go wrong." Lily looked at her drawing. "You don't look like that anymore." Nolan made a sound that was almost a laugh. He turned it into clearing his throat, without much success. Constance looked at this 9-year-old with her too long coat and her sketchbook and her clear, unhurried way of seeing things, and felt something she didn't have a precise word for, grateful and stunned in approximately equal measure. "You're very observant," she said. "I draw people," Lily said, as though this explained everything. It kind of did. 6 weeks later, the board was reconstituted properly. Howard Breslin agreed to serve as interim chair during the audit period and the transition, under the specific condition that he be allowed to hold the role without being called interim. Constance agreed. They were in each other's company for 9 minutes to settle it, which was the cleanest negotiation she'd had in 3 years. She rebuilt the conflict of interest review process from scratch. She rebuilt the vendor approval framework. She implemented new access controls on the internal financial system with the help of her IT security lead, a meticulous woman named June Tanaka, who had apparently been documenting anomalies in the system for 8 months and had submitted a memo about it to the board's oversight subcommittee, which Patricia had chaired, where it had been tabled for further review. Constance sat with that for a long time. Then she asked June to walk her through everything, and June did, with the patience of someone who had been waiting to be asked by someone who could do something about it. The partnership proposal was ready in the second week of March. She'd built it over 5 weeks deliberately, at the pace of something chosen rather than something urgent, because the urgency of November had been a symptom of the crisis. This was not a crisis. This was a decision. She took the clean financial structure, the reconstituted board, the new governance framework, and Gerald's rebuilt 3-year projections, and she built something that was honest about where the company was and specific about where it was going. She restructured the partnership terms entirely. No advisory arrangements for connected parties, clean equity position, clear decision rights. And she added a section she hadn't included in November, a transparency provision she'd written herself, laying out what she expected from a partner and what a partner could expect from her. Gerald had read it and said, "Some investors will find this unusual." She'd said, "I know. I'm looking for one who doesn't." He'd understood. She called Brennan on a Tuesday morning. She'd thought about contacting Nolan directly and decided against it. The proper channel was right, the one that recognized what they were. Two principals who had navigated a complicated situation and were now considering a professional relationship, which was something distinct from Saturday mornings at Anchor and Grind and Lily's sketchbook and the particular quality of warmth that had grown between them in the private part of their lives. She wanted to keep those things separate, not hidden, distinct. "He's been asking about your timeline," Brennan said. "How's Thursday?" She exhaled. "Thursday's good." She went home that Tuesday night and stood at her kitchen window looking at the harbor. She thought about November. The corridor outside the preview room, the 4-sentence email, the cold, deliberate way she'd been breathing so no one could see what was happening inside her. She was still 34, still running the same company she'd been handed before she felt ready for it. Still not fully ready, because that was not actually a state that existed for people doing things that mattered. But she'd built something now. The knowledge, earned the hard way, that she could walk into the worst room and hold it. That she could be wrong and say so. That she could ask for help without it costing her something she needed. Thursday morning, she arrived at Whitmore Capital's offices for the first time. Functional, clean, good light, furniture that had been chosen for use rather than impression. Brennan met her in the lobby. Nolan was at his desk when she came in, not performing busy, just present. He stood. They shook hands. It was slightly formal and also slightly absurd given that she knew how he took his coffee, and he'd once spent 20 minutes helping Lily untangle a sketchbook page that had stuck together, and they both seemed to register that at the same moment, because the handshake dissolved into something close to a laugh without quite arriving there. "Sit down," he said. She sat. She put the proposal on the desk between them. 41 pages, everyone earned. They went through it for 80 minutes. He asked the kind of questions that came from actually reading what was in front of him. She answered directly, including 2 instances where the honest answer was, "I don't know yet, here's how I plan to find out," which she would not have said in November, and which she said now without difficulty, because she'd learned that pride was expensive, and she'd become more careful about where she spent it. When he reached the transparency provision, he stopped. He read it twice. "You wrote this yourself," he said. "Yes. It's asking for something most companies wouldn't offer. I'm offering a different company than I had in November," she said. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, 2 minor structural changes. I'll have Brennan send the red lines today, and I want a separate conversation with Gerald about the Q3 projections before we finalize." She felt the words settle. "Subject to those 2 things," he said, "I'm in." The morning light came through the windows on 2 sides. The city moved outside the glass, indifferent and continuous, doing what the city always did. She looked at the man who had walked into her company's preview room 4 months ago with a Tim Hortons cup and let himself be shown the door and had watched, from a careful distance, while she built the thing that needed to be built and had never once tried to carry it for her. "Thank you," she said. "We're going to build something good," he said. It wasn't a performance. It was just what he believed was true. "I know we are," she said. They shook hands. This time it meant something different. She took the elevator down and stepped out into the March air and stood on the sidewalk for a moment, the way she'd been standing on sidewalks all the way through this story, pausing at the threshold between what had just happened and whatever came next. Her phone buzzed. Lily, Dad told me. Congrats on the deal. Does this mean you'll be around more? Constance stopped walking. She looked at the message. She looked at the street. Yes, she typed. A lot more. A pause. Then Lily, good. I started a new drawing. You're in it. You look less worried this time. Constance smiled. The real one, the one that arrived without preparation. I'll come see it Saturday, she typed. She put her phone in her pocket and kept walking. Into the March cold. Into the city she'd always lived in, which was the same city it had been in November, and entirely different for everything that had happened inside it. Into the next version of her life, which was not going to be clean or final or free from rooms that would be hard to walk into, but it was hers. The company and the governance reforms and the reconstituted board and the partnership and the Saturday mornings at a cafe with scuffed floors and a girl who drew everything she saw with clear eyes and a steady hand. The work, unglamorous and daily, and hers. She had earned it the only way things actually got earned. Not by being ready at the start, but by still being there when it mattered, carrying everything she'd learned from the hard rooms and the wrong turns and the people who had seen her more clearly than she'd seen herself. She turned the corner. The harbor appeared ahead of her, gray and wide and familiar. She kept walking toward it,